Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have some questions from core participants. They should last around 30 minutes. First, we're going to hear from Ms. Oliver on behalf of Gareth Jenkins, then from Mr. Henry, and then from Mr. Steen. And then we'll proceed to a very short break while everyone will stay in the room for 5 minutes, and we'll go on to hear from Mr. Leighton.
Very well, thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Longman. I ask questions on behalf of Gareth Jenkins. I just want to look at 2 occasions, if I may, where you received information from Mr. Jenkins during the course of the Seema Misra case. Firstly, if we can have up, please, POL 001 75703, please. Thank you very much. This is an email from you to Penny Thomas on the 29th of January of 2010. And it says, Penny, when Gareth completes his statement about Calendar Square, could he also mention whether there are any known problems with the Horizon system that Fujitsu are aware of? If none, could this be clarified in the statement? Do you remember making that request?
Yes, I do.
And did that request derive from some advice that you had received from Mr. Tatford?
It did, yes.
In relation to Pol's disclosure obligations?
Yes.
Thank you. If we can have up then, please, FUJ 001 67159. Can I give that reference again? It's FUJ 001 67159. Let me check that reference. I'm sorry. It is an email we've looked at over lunch on the system, so I'm hoping that it will be available. Can we try it? This may be my error. I'm so sorry if it is. Can we try POL 001 67159? Apologies. Thank you. That's the one. Thank you. I apologise. Can we scroll down, please? Thank you. This is an email from David Jones to Mr. Singh that was forwarded to you on the 8th of February of 2010. Do you recall that email?
Well, if I was copied into it, I would have read it at the time.
All right. Thank you. All right, well then if we can look at paragraph 3, what Mr. Jones says there is he is not currently in a position to make a clear statement. It is possible for there to be problems where transactions have been lost in particular circumstances due to locking issues. When this happens, then we have events in the underlying eventing logs to indicate that there was an issue. Whenever we provide transaction logs to POL, we check for any such events. In the case of West Byfleet, we have not been asked to provide any transaction logs and so have not made these checks. And this, I suggest, was a response to your question of the 29th of January as to whether there are any known problems within Horizon. Do you recall that?
I remember asking, obviously, the question on the previous statement, whether this particular paragraph relates to that, I'm not sure.
All right. But what is clear, isn't it, is that what Mr. Jenkins, or what you are being told from Mr. Jenkins, is that he can't make a clear statement to that effect, and that there are possibly problems where transactions can be lost within Horizon. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and that he needs transaction logs to make checks for the West Byfleet case to see if there was any issues.
Can you recall whether this information about potentially lost transactions prompted any further investigative steps by you?
I can't recall any, no.
All right. Did you consider this material from Mr. Jenkins in light of your disclosure obligations?
No, I probably didn't at the time.
Do you recall whether you sought any advice about this material from Mr. Singh or Mr. Tatford?
Well, I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. Can I just, at the top of the who was copied into this email? Is it?
So if we scroll up, you can see that the original email goes to Mr. Singh and is copied to Mr. Jenkins. And then if we scroll up to the top of that page, please, it's forwarded Warwick and John for your information and comments from Mr. Singh.
So myself, Mr. Singh and Mr. Tatford knew about that paragraph.
Yes. Can you recall if there was any discussion between you as to what to do with that material you'd been told by Mr. Jenkins?
No, I can't, I'm afraid.
Thank you. If we can turn then to the second topic, and if I can please have up, and I hope I've got the reference right, it's FUJ 00153 and if we can scroll down, please. You've been taken to this document earlier in your evidence. If we can scroll down, I think, to page 2, please. A little further. A little further, the email from Izzy Hogg, who was the defence solicitor for Mrs. Misra. We can see here that the defence have made some further disclosure requests, and the third of those is access to the system change requests, known error log, and new release documentation to understand what problems have had to be fixed. Do you recall that disclosure request?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And then if we can scroll right back up to the top, please. Thank you. And to point 3 within that email. So this is an email from Penny Thomas to you, indicating that she's had a discussion with Gareth and outlining what his views, or at least what his recollection of his discussion with Charles McLaughlin was. And at point 3, system change requests Basically, he was asking to look at all system faults. I suggested that as we kept all testing and live faults in the same system, and that there were around 200,000 of them, then this wasn't going to get him far. He then suggested looking at system changes and would like to see all the changes that have happened to the system. Again, I don't think this will help, and I don't know how practical it is for Fujitsu's release management to provide that. I think all we can do is ask the question. Do you recall that email?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And this, isn't it, is Mr. Jenkins saying that this information that the defence have mentioned about system faults and changes exists and could be investigated by Fujitsu?
Yes. I'll go
Thank
along
you.
with it.
If a final document, please, can I have POL 000 55073? Thank you. This was forwarded on by you to Mr. Singh. Sorry, if we can just scroll down a little bit, please. We see on the 27th of July 2010, Jarnell, this is the response that I have received from Penny following Izzy Hogg's email. And then if we can scroll down to the bottom of that page, please. Thank you. As for point 3, I will ask Penny Thomas whether Fujitsu's release management team can provide the defence expert with system fault data. So this is you indicating to Mr. Singh that, in line with what has been suggested by Mr. Jenkins, further inquiries can be made of Fujitsu about this material. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you receive any guidance from Mr. Singh or Mr. Tatford about investigative steps that ought to be undertaken in relation to what you've been told about system faults and changes?
I don't recall any guidance given.
Do you recall any guidance being given by Mr. Singh or Mr. Tatford in relation to how that material and information might impact on Pol's disclosure obligations?
Again, I can't recall any.
Did you consider how that material might impact on Pol's disclosure obligations?
It depends on where this went. When I asked Penny Thomas, I said I will ask Penny Thomas whether Fujitsu's release management team can provide the defence expert with system fault data. It depends what happened thereafter.
Well, were you aware that work was done within Fujitsu as to what investigating that system change data would involve?
No, I wasn't aware.
Okay. But nonetheless, that the defence requests regarding system changes, the known error log and new release documents, were refused before Fujitsu could feed back on that work. Were you aware of that?
Again, because of the passage of time, I know certain disclosure requests were refused, and this may have been one of them, but I can't actually recall without seeing a document that says that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Longman. That's all I had.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver. Next, please.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Longman, I represent Seema Misra. Communication between you and your colleagues as investigators in the security department, there must have been good communication between you.
Well, as an investigator, you would normally work with one or two colleagues on a regular basis, and you'd probably have communication with them. But as a national team, I wouldn't say there was a good communication, no.
Well, you said earlier today, when I started putting schedules together, I became aware that other investigators had potential challenges to Horizon. That indicates a degree of communication, doesn't it?
Yes, because when I picked up the civil litigation, when I was asked to assist with civil litigation, another thing that came out was that because there could be more challenges, that any documentation for offices where Horizon could be raised as a challenge, we should make sure that we secure all documentation and don't shred anything or destroy it in line with our normal retention periods. We should keep it longer. So I was asked, I can't remember how it came about, but I was asked to devise a schedule or find out if anybody had any potential offices or had done any interviews where Horizon integrity may be raised. And if so, I was then trying to save all that data from being destroyed in line with retention policies. Right. And that's how that schedule came together.
Thank you, Mr. Longman. You had good communication with the criminal law team, didn't you?
What, during this case or...
Yeah, during Mrs. Misra's case.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And you also had liaison with Mr. Jenkins, didn't you?
Through Penny Thomas, yes.
Yeah. But you felt able to, as it were, make changes to his statement, and you must have had direct dealings with him during the course of the trial and in the run-up to the trial.
No, I wouldn't. I would say Mr. Tatford really would liaise with Mr. Jenkins more than I did.
Are you saying you had no contact at all with Mr. Jenkins in the run-up to the trial and during the trial?
Well, I'd have limited contact, yes. I'd speak to him. With regards to the statement that you mentioned, that paragraph was... I was asked to review his statement. I don't recall a great deal of conversation or communication between me and Mr. Jenkins.
Right. I'm moving on to a different topic now. The receipts and payments mismatch bug. When did you first hear of that bug?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
On the 12th of December 2023, when answering my questions, Mr. Wilson said that he and Mr. Jarnail Singh and Miss Juliet McFarlane became aware of the receipts and mismatch bug on the 8th of October 2010. You know that Mrs. Misra's trial began on the 11th of October 2010. Mm-hmm. And I asked Mr. Wilson what he did in respect of that information, and he said this: I think what I did was I spoke to John Longman. Did he?
I don't recall that. I don't recall. I'm not familiar with what you've just mentioned. So he says he thinks he mentioned it to me, but I've got no recollection of a conversation about it. It's not to say that I didn't, but I don't. It doesn't ring any bells.
I see. I think what I said, what I did was I spoke to John Longman. You're not saying he's lying, are you?
I'm saying I don't know.
So you're prepared to accept that what he said is potentially correct?
It might be right, it might be wrong. That's all I can say.
All right. You were, surely, I mean, Gareth Jenkins, he was aware, we know this, he was aware of the receipts and payments mismatch bug. Did you discuss that with him?
No, not that I can recall.
It wasn't disclosed in Mrs. Misra's trial. The existence of an important bug, the receipts and mismatch bug, was not disclosed in Mrs. Misra's trial. Was that deliberate?
Not on my part, no, because I don't think I was aware of it.
Well, look, I'm now going to ask you, what did you do wrong in Seema Misra's case?
Well, at the time, I didn't think I'd done anything wrong, but obviously, since the inquiry, it seems that the disclosure of other potential Horizon integrity issues should have been made known to the defence.
Right. You stated, of course, at page 42, paragraph 86 of your statement, it appeared at least, that you'd read the Hamilton judgment and you had no regrets. So I just want to now go through some evidence that we've heard in the inquiry and also the Court of Appeal's findings very quickly. First of all, you did not ensure that full and accurate records of her calls to the helpline were disclosed and presented at her trial. Do you accept that?
Is this to a Fujitsu helpline you're referring to? A CD containing it was, I thought, exhibited by Mr. Dunks.
They were summarised, Mr. Longman, that CD. No. They were summarised in ways which left out significant technical problems. Did that have anything to do with you?
Well, no, but I thought the actual raw, although it's summarised, I thought there was a further two statement containing the full raw data that those... I'm sure it would serve in defence.
Her calls to the helpline were effectively censored to remove complaints about the Horizon system. Was that anything to do with you?
No.
ARQ data was not provided in an unfiltered state, but was culled and didn't cover the indictment period. Was that anything to do with you?
No, as previously explained, that was... I asked for the full 3 years of data, but it was refused on cost grounds.
No examination of that data for bugs, errors and defects or to justify evidence of theft. Was that anything to do with you?
No.
No evidence to corroborate the Horizon evidence. You were the investigator and disclosure officer. Was that anything to do with you?
Well, to identify any bugs with Horizon, we would have been relying on Fujitsu. So to analyse the data that was provided, which was 1 year. So I wouldn't be able to identify a bug or a glitch in the system.
I see. So what are you apologising for? Because you don't appear to be accepting responsibility for any of the matters that I put to you.
Well, I'm apologising because with hindsight, maybe I should have been a bit more forceful with trying to get this disclosure to the defence and realising that where there were previous cases where there are unexplained losses, that these should also have been made available to the defence.
Right. Well, last topic about hindsight. We've seen your statement, which was POL 54041, dated the 5th of February 2010. I don't want to put it up on the screen, but you said at the bottom of page 1, going over to page 2, I've never experienced any problems with the Horizon system other than pressing the wrong icon, etc., etc. You were trying to insinuate the reliability of Horizon, weren't you?
I was trying to explain that when I used the system, I'd had no problems, although my involvement with using Horizon was very limited to Christmas pressure time or when there was strike action. Yeah. That's all I was doing.
I see. At the time you signed that statement, you had information about Mrs. Odell's case and Mr. Hosey's case, didn't you?
Yes.
Mrs. Odell, you knew she hadn't committed theft and neither had her family. You said that. And you also said that she'd made numerous calls to the helpline telling them everything in the 5 months before she was audited. So you knew all about Mrs. Odell's case and the decision not to prosecute, because you knew, didn't you, that there was no basis to prosecute?
Yes, I wasn't happy with being given that case.
Yeah.
I really wasn't.
And if an unjust decision to prosecute had been made, it was highly likely you'd lose, with massive and embarrassing publicity undermining the myth of Horizon. Correct?
I didn't think a prosecution should take place because she had been refused the transaction log data, and that is a clear case where that should have gone to Fujitsu for investigation.
It was out and out, as you said this morning, to do with the system. Your words.
Sorry.
You said this morning it was out and out to do with the system. In other words, the system was at fault, in your view, looking at all of the evidence.
What, on Mrs. Adele's case?
Yes.
No, I couldn't say the system was at fault, but we hadn't done enough in that case to prove one way or another. And as we hadn't done anything to inquire about the workings of Horizon, I felt it was a bit of an unjust case.
You said this morning, sir, out and out, it's the system. It should have been further investigated.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. But it wasn't investigated, I suggest, because you knew, together with Mr. Singh, that you'd get the wrong answer. Isn't that right?
No, not at all.
And so it was swept under the carpet, wasn't it?
No. The transaction log data wasn't provided. With hindsight, I should have been more forceful and said we need transaction log data, and this should go to Fujitsu for analysis of any bugs or glitches.
Mr. Hosey, you knew about his case as well because you, together with Mrs. Allan, had interviewed him, correct?
I only knew about it when I saw the additional documents. I mean, it was from some time ago.
Yeah.
You don't always particularly remember somebody else's case.
He'd made multiple calls to the helpline in the 5 months, again, coincidentally, 5 months before he was audited, and he had even urgently asked for face-to-face help. You should have disclosed both cases to Mrs. Misra's team, shouldn't you?
With hindsight, yes.
You should have revised your statement of the 5th of February before her trial in October, shouldn't you?
To reflect this?
Yes.
Yes.
And what I'm going to ask you to do in conclusion is to tell the truth. There was no inclination to investigate unexplained losses or shortfalls on behalf of SPMs, was there?
Well, there was, in terms, it probably wasn't as thorough as it should have been. As I say in my statement, it would always be Fujitsu, I would say, who would need to analyse all the transaction log data and not an investigator, because they would have far greater knowledge of the systems to see whether there was a glitch or a bug.
You and your colleagues, with the advice and counsel, I suggest, of the criminal law team, did not wish to investigate anything that might undermine Horizon's infallibility or might assist the sub-postmasters. What do you say to that?
I would say that that our training was to put in, to investigate, put in an offender report, and and see what the reply was from legal services. If it was for further inquiries, then we would undertake that. But yes, looking back, more work should have been done where unexplained losses had occurred. But it wasn't part of our training, wasn't part of our thinking at the time, if I can put it that way.
There was institutional bias to do precisely the opposite of what you ought to have done, wasn't there?
Yes, I can't disagree. There should have been more inquiries with Fujitsu in a lot more cases than what actually did occur. I don't know how many cases Fujitsu have actually looked at for glitches and bugs, but it's clear now, looking back, that there should have been more cases referred to them for analysis.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Mr. Steen?
Mr. Longman, I represent Jennifer Odell. I'm going to take you straight to a document, please, which is POL 00105-147. Thank you. Could you go, please, to page 6 of that document? Thank you. Now, in your evidence today, you've said this, that in relation to Mrs. Odell's case, you said that it was the one case that was allocated to me when I think I did speak to a manager or someone else saying, why had this been passed over to us? And you made a variety of other comments about this case, saying essentially that you felt that there was something wrong with it. All right? So can we have a look at what you said in relation to matters going back to 2010? So under the words legal,
Yes.
there's then trading accounts to show a balance. Then Mrs. Odell was unable to offer an explanation that made any sense as to why multiple cash declarations were made in December 2009. And then she is referred to as being adamant about the losses as a result of discrepancies in the system. And you're aware and will recall giving evidence today about Mrs. Odell repeatedly contacting the helpline, trying to get some assistance in this matter, where you also said today that she wasn't helped by the helpline. Okay?
That's correct, yes.
All right. Okay. So let's have a look at the last few lines of that paragraph under legal. Okay? And it says this: if charges of false accounting are to be considered, then Section 1 of the Fraud Act 2006 would seem the most appropriate. Now, Mr. Longman, for someone that is concerned about a case as to why it's been allocated to your team, and about someone who has made a number of complaints to the helpline with no help from the helpline, why are you even considering the possibility of an allegation of false accounting against Mrs. Odell?
I suppose there was there still was 10,000 or close to 10,000 missing, and false accounting had been done by her own admission. But with hindsight and looking at it now, I should have marked it as no further action or something to that effect. I accept that.
It's not with hindsight, Mr. Longman. That's why I pointed out your evidence earlier. You've said already, at the time, you thought there was something wrong with this case. But
Yes.
you're going around suggesting that they might want to consider false accounting against Mrs. Odell. How on earth does that make any sense, Mr. Longman?
Well, all I can say is that there was an amount of money that was missing, and there was. Well, I accept your point. It should have been no further action, and that line should not have been in there.
Well, let's go to another document if we can, please. The document is POL 00143570. Thank you. Go to the bottom of the first page, please. Now, this document is a correspondence between yourself and Jarnell Singh. This is from Mr. Singh to you. And it says this at the bottom there: the circumstances of the facts will cause difficulties in prosecuting this case, and the business will come under grave criticism, which the defence will exploit, as can be seen in recent prosecution cases. Mr. Longman, can you help us understand why on earth is the question of the business coming under criticism anything to do with whether someone should or should not be prosecuted?
Well, it shouldn't apply. That was written by Mr. Singh, so it shouldn't have been. It shouldn't have been a factor. No. No.
Was the reputational question that related to Post Office as a business something that intruded into considerations as to prosecutions?
I would say no.
Go to the bottom of the second page, please. Now, here, Mr. Singh is saying this, that in his view, a caution should be administered in this case. Now,
yeah.
you've said there's something wrong with this case. You've agreed with me. You wish you hadn't written something about the possibility of false accounting. What on earth was going on that Mr. Singh is proposing a caution in relation to a case that you thought, frankly, was wrong?
Well, yeah, between me and Mr. Singh, I think it's, yeah, it should have been, as I say, the case should have been looked at and no further action.
Did you ever consider Mrs. Adele's background in that she had used to work for the HM Prison Service in a clerical role? She'd worked for the Cambridgeshire Police at their headquarters in the control room answering 999 calls, and she'd worked at a housing association in her time, and at the time of these matters being investigated, she was seeking to run as a parliamentary candidate. Did any of those matters ever come into your head when thinking about what on earth has happened here with this poor lady who's making repeated complaints to a system that doesn't answer a question?
Well, I wasn't aware of. I was aware of some of what you've just said, but you know.
And lastly,
yeah.
Mr. Longman, when investigating this matter, if that's the right word to use, did you once pull aside her son, Daniel, aged 20, and ask him whether she loved his mother, and basically suggested to him the question whether his mother might have been nicking money from the post office? Do you remember doing that?
I remember receiving a letter from her son, and we interviewed him, not under caution, but on a friend interview. I can't remember what was said, but and if it was said, it wasn't in that context. So,
thank you, Mr. Longman.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Those are all the questions for Mr. Longman.
Thank you, Mr. Longman, for making a detailed witness statement and for answering the questions put to you by a variety of people today. I'm grateful to you for participating in the inquiry.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to have a very quick change round. So if I could ask everybody to remain seated.
That doesn't include you, Mr. Longman. You are now free to go, so to speak. All right?
Thank you. Thank you, Sir Will.
Sir, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can call Mr. Leighton.
Before he's sworn, I just want to make it clear to everyone that I had an appointment arranged for this evening, which I have tried to change, but I cannot. And so I am afraid I do have to finish promptly at 4:30. That is not a declaration that Mr. Leighton's evidence has to finish by then, but it is an indication that if it hasn't finished by then, he will have to return at some other time, which is suitable for everyone.
Thank you, sir. In that case, if I may call Mr. Leighton now. Thank you.
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
shall
be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth. Lovely. Thank you. Next.
Yeah, please take a seat. Mr. Leighton, could I ask you to state your full name?
Allan Leslie Leighton.
Thank you for preparing your witness statement and for coming to the inquiry today to give evidence. I want to start with your witness statement. It should be in front of you, dated 28th of February 2024.
Yes.
Do you have that? Yes. For the record, the URN is WITN 043801000. Before I take you to your signature, I understand there's a small typographical correction you wish to make. Page 20, paragraph 38.
That's correct. It's the third up from the bottom. It says, I note from poll 009553 that in August 2005, you should actually read October 2008.
So that should be October 2008. Thank you. Could we please turn to page 30 of your statement? Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And subject to that one clarification that you've just made, are the contents of the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
Thank you, Mr. Leighton. That stands as your evidence in the inquiry. The witness statement will be published on the website shortly. I'm going to ask you some questions on it, but before I do, I understand you wish to say a few words.
Yes, I do. What's happened has been a terrible thing for everybody who's been involved in it, particularly the sub-postmasters, sub-postmistresses. It's unbelievable that it's happened. And I just wanted to say that I'm sorry that the elements of that occurred while my tenure at the Royal Mail, I'm sorry for that happening.
Mr. Leighton, I'll move on to my questions. Your evidence today concerns the role you held whilst at Royal Mail Group. Before you joined Royal Mail, your CV includes being Group CEO of Asda Group PLC, and following a takeover, you were President and CEO of Walmart Europe until November 2000.
That's correct.
You were appointed as a non-executive director of Consignia PLC in April 2001.
Yes.
Now, we'll see documents that say Consignia PLC. That shortly, the year after, became Royal Mail Holdings. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm going to refer to the group as Royal Mail. If I need to, I'll distinguish Royal Mail Holdings and Royal Mail Group as we go through. So after being appointed a non-executive director, you were appointed interim chair of Royal Mail in January 2002.
That's correct.
And then a permanent chair on March 2002.
That's correct.
And between January 2002 and April 2003, you were chairman of Post Office Limited.
That's correct.
Could we please look at POL 30021476? These are minutes of a board meeting of Consignia, we said Royal Mail. You attended as a non-executive director, we can see on the present list. Yep. Could we turn to page 4, please? No surprise, I'm not going to the irrelevant part. I'll go to the H. It says, Horizon. The board also expressed its congratulations and thanks to the team working on the Horizon programme on the successful completion of the installation of over 40,000 machines and training of over 60,000 people in Post Office network. What were you told about Horizon when you joined Royal Mail?
Well, this was in the early days of Royal Mail Consignia as it was. Basically, I was told about the programme, the scale of the programme, the size of the programme, and that this was the stage that people were at. And I think from, it's a long time ago, so I'm sort of just looking at the data. I think this was a stage where people felt that they put 40,000 machines in and trained 60,000 people, and that had been something that warranted some congratulations to the team who'd done it.
So it's congratulations. Was there any feedback or discussion on things that had gone wrong?
Again, it's a long time ago. I don't recall that, but not that I can recall.
Do you recall asking anyone about the either pilot, design, or rollout of Horizon?
Oh, when I joined the organisation, yes, I did, and I met a number of people who were in charge of the projects. I spent a bit of time looking outside what was happening in the post offices as well. And basically the view was it's like all big programs. It's a massive program, thousands of people, thousands of offices, thousands of processes. And like all those big programs, it was moving forward, but there were issues as it went, and those issues were being resolved.
When you say there were issues, could you describe what you were told about them?
No, I mean, they were just described as the normal issues that you would have when you were rolling out one of these large programs. And a lot of the conversation was about process, i.e. because when you change something like this, the process changes as big as the tech change in a strange way. A lot of it was about process and getting people bedded into using it.
Did anyone say anything to you that would give rise to suspicion that the accounting data generated by Horizon may be unreliable?
Absolutely not.
Please can we turn to page 7. And to the bottom of the page, please. Thank you. So this refers to boundary and scope decisions in the context of creating Post Office Limited, noting a paper by Stuart Sweetman, which identified the outstanding issues of boundary and scope related to the creation of Post Office Limited under partial and total separation, along with the high-level implications for Consignia and Post Office Limited. The next one refers to final decisions on total separation could not be taken until the precise purpose of total separation and associated value issues were known. So it was just an in-principle decision. Could you briefly summarise just the background to what this discussion was about?
Yeah, I think a decision had been made by the government that actually Post Office Limited should be separated from the Royal Mail at some stage. It was a lot off the back of there'd been conversations when I joined of selling the Mail's business to the Dutch Post Office as a solution to some of the modernisation costs. That conversation would entail POL as a government-owned social responsibility to be separated from the rest of what was then Consignia, let's call it Royal Mail. And this, I think, is part of that piece of thinking. Subsequent to that, I think, as I say in my written statement, myself and a number of other directors felt that this was not a sensible thing to be selling the Royal Mail's letters business to the Dutch at that particular time, because it was unprofitable, would have had a real declination of value for the country, and was saddled with industrial action issues. And our view was on two fronts. One is financially this is not a sensible thing. Secondly, there would have been a high degree, I think, of union unrest and industrial action, which would have been crippling for the organisation and for the country.
We know that separation, so that document can come down for the time being. Separation didn't occur until 2012.
Oh, sorry, yeah, no, but I think the other piece of this was that as planning for that separation, which people thought would come earlier, i.e. if the business was sold to the Dutch, then clearly POL would be left on its own, that this work should take place and that POL should be run slightly separately from the rest of the business anyway to get that particular focus, and the fact that, of course, it was heavily subsidised because of heavily loss-making by the government. I think it was to really just get POL on its own format, so it could be run separately if and when this sort of change took place.
So more like more of an autonomous subsidiary than a business unit within a parent.
Yeah, I think a bit of both. But I think the idea was not for it to be a subsidiary eventually, but to start with, as we decided not to sell it to the Dutch, then it would make sense to at least go to this first stage at this stage.
Please could we bring up POL 30021480. Excuse me, minutes of a board meeting on the 26th of September 2002 for Post Office Limited. This is when you were chairman, of that company. Please can we turn to page 2 of those minutes? It says under chairman's business at A, that interviews had taken place with several candidates for position of Post Office Limited chairman and for non-executive directors of Consignia. Consideration was also being given to the appointment of a non-executive director to the board of Post Office Limited. Was it your responsibility to find a chairman for Post Office Limited at this stage?
Yes, because the original idea was when I was initially recruited as I would be the chairman of Post Office Limited, and as you know and as you can see, that got changed in a relatively short period of time. But it was always the idea that the Post Office should have its own chairman and at least probably one independent director on its board.
David Mills has given evidence to this inquiry that there's no need to turn it up, but the effect of it was that you had been instructed by the Department for Trade and Industry to appoint a independent chair of Post Office Limited and a non-executive director. Is that correct?
I think instructed is probably a bit too far. I mean, we agreed that that was a sensible thing to do for the organisation, depending on now what we decided we were likely to be. And of course, obviously, all those people went through the Nolan process, which is the process which government, recommend and commend, people into their organisations.
And when you were looking for a new chairman and a non-executive director, what sort of experience and qualifications in a person were you looking for?
I think two or three things really. One, a sort of a broad commercial experience. Also, helpfully, if that person had worked in consumer goods type products, because clearly one of the issues that was facing POL was a lot of the government products were being withdrawn. 40% of its income was going to disappear. Those products needed to be replaced with something else. And to a degree, I think somebody who'd worked in a regulated industry and, over time had been in organisations with a number of people.
We've heard a lot of, we've heard evidence that of the financial position Post Office Limited was in at that time. Would you accept that there was an overwhelming priority to make Post Office Limited solvent, bring it to profitability?
I mean, I think solvent. I'd start with solvent. I mean, the business was in. All of the businesses were in a dire strait. I mean, Post Office was losing a lot of money. The size of the network couldn't be supported with the money that was in the organisation. It was dependent on government money into the mix, and 40%, often 60% of its revenue was going to disappear at some stage. So that's pretty dire. That doesn't happen to many organisations, and therefore the most important thing to start with is to get the solvency, and you can see that took a period of time. And remember, the directors of the company, that the solvency, the going concern of the Post Office is a massive issue. But in parallel with that, the only way that you were ever going to solve the issue was you had to have new products, you had to do something about the network, and you had to have a system, Horizon, that enabled those changes to take place at a branch-by-branch level.
When you were looking for non-executive directors or chairs for the board, did you primarily have in mind people who would be able to bring it to solvency?
No, well, yes, but let me say, you don't just bring something to solvency. The way you bring any business into a better position is basically you have a better business. And so, you know, the product development side of Pole was really, really important because something had to replace the products that were being taken away. So it wasn't just, you know, solvency is not something you can just wave a flag and it appears. You have to do a series of things to get there. And one of the things to get there is to obviously maintain your sales or grow your sales, but also to try and do that in a way which is more efficient. And part of the reason, I think, of Horizon was that it was supposed to deliver the opportunity for the organisation to be more efficient in the way in which it did its business.
By 2003, that's when I want to look now, at that point, Sir Michael Hodgkinson's appointed as independent chair.
Yeah.
And in the same year, Adam Crozier was appointed as CEO to Royal Mail. Yes?
Yes.
Mr. Crozier, when he gave evidence, he accepted that at that point, 2003, Post Office Limited was a subsidiary within the group that had the greatest level of autonomy and that it was the only one with its own governance centre. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of the business had autonomy. I think the idea was to try and get Pole to focus on the issues that were really Pole issues rather than necessarily be influenced by what was happening in the Royal Mail. There was a lot of interaction between the two because obviously the two organisations very, very connected in terms of the mix. But the idea was to try and give a degree of independence to Pole that perhaps wasn't afforded to the other pieces of the Royal Mail business.
You said that Post Office Limited should really focus on the Post Office Limited issues. What did you see the Post Office Limited issues as being?
I mean, I think I recall there were four big issues. I mean, the first one was the revenue was disappearing. Products were going to disappear. There would be no revenue. With no revenue, there's no business. So it was a massive issue over how do you replace the products that are going to be disappearing. And, you know, and just to scale that, you know, one thing, the benefits aid is 40% of the revenue. I mean, there are not many organisations that can lose 40% of their revenue and survive. And remember, this was already an organisation that was pretty much insolvent in reality. So number one thing is we've got to get the products right in terms of the mix. The second thing was all about the network. You know, what should the size of this network be? How much of the network should be Crown? How much of the network should be rural? And to a degree, negotiating with the government of how much they would be prepared to pay for the unprofitable parts of Pole, because that was obviously going to deliver a social service, for want of a better description, which is what it did. Then the third piece was really all about the implementation of Horizon. That was the enabler, and those three things were the three critical areas I think the Pole was focused on.
With hindsight, should added to that list be prosecutions of sub-postmasters and oversight of prosecutions of sub-postmasters?
Yeah, well, I think in hindsight, yes. But I think the most important thing is when you're setting these things up and you're setting the organisation up, when you're the non-exec chair, as Mike was and I was at the Royal Mail, then what you've got to make sure, or try and make sure, is that the structures are in place for these things to be managed, because obviously there's many things you're trying to manage at one time. You've got an executive group. I mean, I think this is, I think people do get this, is there's a big difference between non-exec and exec. Non-execs are called non-execs because they don't execute. Executives are called executives because they do execute. So our role, I think, really is to make sure the structures are in place to enable any issue in the business to be raised up the organisation, and therefore you've got the executive management teams who are responsible to do that. You've got all the meeting structures from the Pole Board to the Royal Mail Board to the Audit and Risk Committee to the subcommittees of all of those organisations to the management boards of those organisations that move all the time, and over time. We put in this thing called Have Your Say, and Have Your Say was the ability for people in the organisation at all levels to say what they were feeling about the businesses. So I think were all those structures in place? Absolutely, and that's, I think, what you can do as an organization. The execution of that, I think, as we've seen tragically, was not always what it should be.
We'll come to that shortly. Before we do, can I ask you about corporate codes? Did you apply or take into account any codes relevant to corporate governance and management when you were at Post Office Limited?
I mean, in the broadest sense, yes. That's what we did, and I would say that all of the boards, from a governance perspective, from a corporate governance perspective, I think were very much in line with some of that code.
Which code are you referring to?
Well, I think there's a general code of how you govern an organisation, and there was, there were a lot of best practice about how you do that. A lot of us had come from organisations where that was taking place. Certainly, in my experience, all those businesses were set up from a governance perspective in completely the right way.
Just for clarity, are you referring to the Financial Reporting Council's combined code of corporate governance?
Probably. I can't remember it in that detail.
Were your expectations for the standards of corporate governance in a publicly owned company like Post Office Limited different to your expectations for a publicly listed company?
I think the answer is no. And the reason I say that is I think there's only one good way to run an organisation. And I think you set up the governance for any organisation in what you think is the right way, and you get everybody to buy into that. I think the way that the governance was set up and the way the organisation was run actually made it easier for the government, as the major shareholder, to have a view of what was happening in the business than probably it did before.
Can I just say, I think you prefaced the start of your answer with, I think the right response is, and then you started. Is that actually your view that there should be no difference between a publicly listed and
I think there's a subtle difference in the shareholding, but I think the majority of things that you do are exactly the same. I think there's one good way of running organisations.
And could you expand on what that subtle difference is to which you refer?
Well, I think it is just that you've got the government as a shareholder, and the thing with the government of the shareholder is, governments change, and so do ministers, and so do civil servants. So you've got more. You're dealing with slightly more churn than you probably would do in the outside world.
When you were chairman of Post Office Limited, to whom did you consider yourself to be accountable?
Sorry?
Who did you consider yourself to be accountable to?
To the shareholder.
The government?
Yeah. And
how often,
as chairman of Royal Mail, exactly the same.
How often did you meet government when you were chair of Post Office Limited?
Probably, again, I can't recall exactly, but we would probably have met government 2 or 3 times in that period of time. One of the things that we set up both in Poll and the Royal Mail was you built a plan for the year, and that plan was presented to the minister and his officials, and that plan was signed off by them. So the whole planning of the business and the business plan for the business would be signed off and agreed with the Secretary of State and the officials of the DTI. That would be number one thing. There would have been a lot of dialogue at this stage about the solvency of the Post Office, and a lot of conversation with officials at that stage. And
how much of your discussions was directly with DTI or with shareholder executive?
Well, it changed, as you can see here. I think, if I'm correct, it started off with the DTI, then it moved to the shareholder executive. Yes. So initially, the conversations would have been the DTI. Most of my conversations were with the ministers, because obviously there'd been a plan for what should happen to the Royal Mail. As I say, selling it to the Dutch and then Post Office being left behind and run in a different way, and that plan was no longer going to happen. So there was a lot of discussion about, okay, we better start again, and we really started both in Poll and the Royal Mail the renewal of those companies.
when you were discussing, well, let's start with DTI first. When you were having discussions with DTI, did you ever discuss Horizon?
Again, I honestly can't remember. It's 20 years ago. But so, but I would imagine that we did. But I think it would have been more along, you know, how's it going? I don't think there would have been any detail. There certainly, I wouldn't recall any detail or would think there'd be any detailed conversations about Horizon.
Did you ever talk about prosecutions of sub-postmasters?
Never.
Did your discussions on either of those topics change when you moved to shareholder executives? So, in other words, did you? No. David Mills was appointed to the board of Post Office Limited as chief executive in April 2002, and that's when you were chairman.
Yeah.
What was your working relationship with the directors of Post Office Limited before David Mills assumed his appointment?
Sorry, could you just repeat that again?
What was your working relationship with the directors of Post Office Limited prior to David Mills' appointment? In essence, I would talk to them on a regular basis and chair the board meetings. So were you effectively overseeing the executive at that point?
To a degree, yes, I would say.
Would you accept that one of your roles as chairman was to ensure that new appointees to the board received an appropriate induction?
Well, again, I think that is a combination of things between the chair and the HR team. But I would expect that there would be some degree of induction taking place, yes.
David Mills, oh, sorry. No. David Mills gave evidence to the inquiry yesterday, and in his witness statement he said that he was barely briefed on anything by anyone when he joined. Even the building security was not expecting me on my first day. I arrived to an empty open plan office and began work. Would you accept that?
Well, first of all, I can't recall that. It's a long time ago. I had a very good working relation with David, and I thought he did an extremely good job. But I find it slightly curious that if you're going to join the post office as its managing director, that you don't really have any idea about any of the issues, and they wouldn't have been discussed in any of your interviews.
When you say any of the issues, what do you mean?
No, I'm just saying. I would certainly in the interviews with David and discussion with David, we'd be talking about what needed to happen in the Post Office Limited. But I couldn't comment on whether he did or didn't get an induction program.
Please, could we bring up RMG 50345? So this is a letter to you setting out it says, I'm writing to confirm the terms of your appointment as non-executive chairman. We see at the top it's dated the 26th of November 2003, which is significantly after when you were actually appointed. But does this represent your settled terms of appointment?
Yes.
And at 1C, one of the terms of appointment is to spend at least 2 days a week with the company.
Yes.
And did you do that?
Absolutely.
That can come down. Please, can we bring up the witness statement at page 4, WITN 04380100. If you could go to the bottom, please. So we say, after leaving ASDA, you were appointed to a number of executive roles and non-executive positions. and you list these out. Were these all appointments that were made in 2000 in the first sentence? So B Sky B, Deputy Chairman of Leeds. Were they all in the year 2000?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I can't remember. Yes.
So it says appointed as a non-executive director to B Sky B PLC.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you stood down from that role?
I think it says later on. Actually, I can't recall exactly. Let's have a look at the. Yeah, sorry, I can't recall exactly on that. Yeah.
It says a deputy chairman of Leeds. That came, you say, came to an end in 2003.
Yeah.
Chairman of Last Minute. That stopped in 2004.
Yeah.
Chairman of BHS. Do you remember when that came to an end?
I think that, again, I can't quite recall. I think it's probably 2007 or something like that.
And chairman of Cannons, that came to an end in 2004.
Yeah.
And non-executive director of Dyson. Do you remember when that came to an end?
2004, it's in the witness
2004. And what were the time commitments for these roles?
They varied because obviously they're different sizes. Some of them are NED roles, some of them are INED roles. I think the important thing about this is that when I left Asda, I decided I'd work full-time. So I have worked full-time, still do, on all of my roles. And full-time to me is I work 6 days a week and I do 12 hours a day. So I can spend 60, 70 hours a week working in my organisations because I work on a full-time basis, where most other chairs and NEDs do not do that. And so if I then look at my commitment to the Royal Mail, it was two days a week, which I see as 40% of my time rather than 2 days a week. And therefore, be very clear, I would have spent more than 40% of my time on Royal Mail business the whole of the time that I was chair of that organisation. I work in a very different way to other people. I probably would spend time nearly every day on the Royal Mail or on Poll, because what I don't do is sit in an office and talk to people. What I try to do is get out and about, and I would be in mail centres and delivery offices 5 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night. So I want to be very, very clear that I absolutely spent the time that I required to spend on the Royal Mail and on Post Office Limited. I don't take on any roles that I don't think that I can commit the time to. And I think my reputation whilst in the Royal Mail was probably of the most visible and accessible chair that there'd been. So I'm categoric about this.
By my count, because in 2001, you that's when you were appointed to as a non-executive director of Consignia. You're also appointed chairman of Wilson Connolly and of non-executive director of Scottish Power. That's 8 other appointments outside of Consignia.
At that time?
At that time.
Yeah. And then over a 2-year period, I reduced those by half. But I want to be very categoric that I absolutely spent the time, more time than I was required to do in the Royal Mail and Post Office.
Were any of those FTSE 100 companies?
No. Only B Sky B.
B Sky B?
Yeah.
Was Royal Mail a FTSE 100 company at the time?
Royal Mail, no.
No.
Royal Mail's never been a FTSE 100 company until now.
One of the things the inquiry is looking into is the concept of overboarding, being on too many boards at the same time. What would you say if someone suggested that you were overboarded at this point?
I would repeat what I've just said. I work full-time, long hours, very hard, and I never take on any role that I don't think I can put the time to that I need to. I'm still doing exactly the same today. 20 years on, I'm still doing exactly the same.
So I appreciate we've only just started the evidence, but for the transcriber, we do need to take a break now. I'm going to ask, is a 5-minute break enough? No. So it needs to be a 10-minute break, so.
Yeah, sure. So what time shall we resume?
1:30, please, sir. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before I carry on questioning, I've looked at my note and what's left to cover and the time available. And with apologies to Mr. Leighton, I don't think I can fairly finish his evidence today in the time available. And in fairness to core participants who may wish to ask questions too. I've discussed with Mr. Leighton's recognised legal representative, and he has kindly agreed to arrange to come back to complete his evidence in due course. That cannot be tomorrow, unfortunately, but the inquiry will liaise with his team in due course to arrange a date in future, which will be communicated to other core participants. I hope you are content with that approach, sir, rather than seeking to rush the evidence now.
Well, I certainly don't want to rush it, and I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Leighton, for accommodating me, in effect. But I'm very sorry that I can't go on beyond 4:30 today.
It's fine.
Thank you, sir. Well, on that, I will bear in mind an appropriate time to stop considering topics, but we'll continue with my questioning.
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, just choose a time between 4:15 onwards.
Yes.
Suit where you are, so to speak.
Thank you. Mr. Leighton, I want to look at risk management. Would you accept that the identification, analysis and management of risk is an important function for the running of a business?
Absolutely.
And it goes to the heart of the role of the executive?
Absolutely. And I think if you read in the Royal Mail accounts, it makes that very clear. The major principle of risk management is with the management of the organisation.
What is the non-executive director or non-executive chairman's role in respect of risk management?
To make sure that the processes are in place that enable that to happen. In terms of risk management, I audit risk committees, obviously a big part of that. But also a lot of risk doesn't just come through the audit and risk committee, it comes from the day-to-day interface that you have with people. So the most important thing is to have some set processes, make it very clear where the responsibility lies. And again, I think you can see certainly in the Royal Mail pieces of the report and accounts that risk management was built up from the bottom of the organisation.
I want to look at Post Office Limited first. Mr. Mills gave evidence to the inquiry yesterday, and his evidence was that when he joined Post Office Limited, it did not maintain a risk register. Would you agree with that?
I really can't recall that. It is. It said that Post Office Limited didn't.
Yes, Post Office Limited.
I'm not aware of that. Mike Hodgkinson, when he came in, I know set up a risk committee for Post Office Limited, but I don't know the detail underneath that.
Could you just explain what your understanding of a risk register is?
Well, I probably don't think about a risk register. It is on risk. The way that it comes to me as a non-executive is there's a risk report, and it identifies the major risks in the company. Today, it puts some, and then looks at constantly where are we with those particular risks.
So, in terms of Post Office Limited, when you say Sir Michael Hodgkinson was in post and you were non-executive chair, you were chairman, is that what you would get? You would get a risk report to read?
No, you wouldn't necessarily get a risk report. You get a report from the risk committee. I think there's a very different thing. So the work that was being done down the organisation, you probably wouldn't see. You'd see a summary of that in some way, shape or form. And that would also go to the Audit Risk Committee of the Royal Mail.
So in terms of what, I'm trying to summarise this, in terms of what you see, does that depend on people lower down the business?
Absolutely.
Identifying those risks?
Absolutely.
And then it's filtered through to you?
Yeah, and well, remember, the way you build risks is bottom-up, top-down. So there's a top-down view of what the risk may be, and there's a bottom-up view of what the risk may be, and that's how it's put together.
So what's the top-down view? How does that come into play?
Well, it is that you would, in the Audit and Risk Committee, they would have a conversation about what they felt the major risks were that were facing the company.
And what, if any, steps can you take to ensure that the risks that are being identified to you are the proper ones and there's nothing falling through the cracks?
Well, two reasons. Well, first of all, you've got not just the Audit and Risk Committee, you've got internal audit, you've got the management, you've got the executive management, you've got the line management. So that whole group is involved in putting together those risks. So you pretty much imagine that that group would be able to cover off all the major risks that there were in the business. But I think that your major point is the heart of risk management is the management takes responsibility for identifying and managing the risks and escalating those risks where they need to.
Was there a difference between how risk was managed in Post Office Limited, as you've described, and at the group level?
I can't really recall. I doubt it. I mean, there's only one way of looking at risk. And a lot of the Post Office Limited risk work would have migrated up into the Audit and Risk Committee, which looked at the whole of the Royal Mail Group, not just the letters, parcels business. It looked at all the risks in all the organisations.
That was, you preempted my next question, was we've heard, no, not at all. We've heard evidence that at the group level there was an Audit and Risk Committee.
Yeah.
And on Post Office Limited there was a Risk and Compliance Committee. Was audit a group function?
Again, I can't recall 100%. I think internal audit, from what I can recall, probably was a group function.
Why was it kept as a group function?
I think a bit of history. The way I've thought about this is that when Post Office was, when the company was called Post Office, which had the letters and every other business in it, then I think each one of the individual businesses ran the operational side of things, but actually there was a central group, which was pretty consistent, I think, on risk, on legal, on all of those things. When it moved across to Consignia and then to Royal Mail, I think that same core idea was kept in place.
So,
but you would, again, I'm not sure, but I would pretty much sure you'd have people within those groups dedicated to one part of the business.
So there would be someone at the group or in group on audit who would be dedicated to Post Office Limited?
I'm not 100% sure, but that's what I would sort of think would be the case.
And just so I'm clear, when you were referring to before, when it was Post Office, that's when it was a statutory corporation?
Yeah, when Post Office was what the Royal Mail became.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was the change in 2001 where it became Consignia, then Royal Mail.
Yeah.
At that point, was there ever a review or thought about where audit should sit, or was it just that it continued from how it had always been?
Again, I can't. I mean, the honest answer, I don't know, but I would imagine that it just was. The idea was keep those central functions where they're central functions.
In respect of audit, do you see there being any disadvantages with audit being a group function and not something that the subsidiary had ownership of?
No. I mean, it's the issue is, the thing about structure, everybody thinks it's about structure. It's not. It's about what people do. You can have any structure in the world and it'll either work or it won't. What makes it work is what people do. So whether you have whether you have a central function or a local function, they do the same thing. So I think as long as there's some degree of focus, then it doesn't matter where it is in reality.
What about for the directors on the Post Office Limited board or the executive team on the Post Office Limited board? did they have access to the group audit staff or the group audit function?
Well, the chairman and CEO or MD sat on the Royal Mail group board, so they absolutely did. I'm not sure about the others, but I would imagine that they would definitely have access if they wanted it, and t'other way round. I mean, the way businesses work is they don't just work up and down. The most important thing is how they work across. So there was an opportunity for anybody to have any interface with anyone in the organisation they wanted. That's what makes structures work.
What could you just, before moving on, describe what the formal reporting lines were from the Post Office Limited Board to the Royal Mail Group?
As I said, that Mike Hodgkinson sat on the Royal Mail Group and reported to me, and David Mills exactly the same. Then the same with Alan Cook, except for Alan Cook reported to Adam.
Crozier.
Adam Crozier.
With hindsight, do you think there was any lack of clarity in the group structure that would prevent the flow of information between the parent and subsidiary and vice versa?
No, I don't.
I want to look, please, at prosecutions. Could we bring up paragraph 48 of your witness statement, which is page 25? You say, although I do not have specific recollections, I must have been aware, at least as a general matter, that the Post Office also prosecuted individuals for fraud-related offences. I would expect, or cannot recall, that there were relevant practices, guidelines and policies available in relation to the investigation of any alleged wrongdoing and subsequent criminal proceedings. When did you first become aware of the prosecution of sub-postmasters for theft, fraud, offences and false accounting by companies within the Royal Mail Group?
In which way?
Well, when was the first time that you were aware that sub-postmasters were prosecuted for those offences by a Royal Mail Group?
When I joined the organisation.
And how did you find that information out?
How did I find that out? Two things. Obviously, as I was going to become the chairman of POL, that was the idea. Then I read about POL and the history of POL, and as you know, that's been there for a long period of time. So I knew it from that perspective. And then when I joined, as I say, I would have, in all probability, seen the heads of all the different departments. And they would have confirmed that. So I really knew it from the beginning. It's the history of the organisation.
Were you aware that the decision of whether to prosecute someone or a sub-postmaster was made by a Royal Mail Group company?
Yeah.
Were you aware that the prosecution was conducted by a Royal Mail Group company?
Yes.
The inquiry has heard evidence this week from Allan Cook, who says he was unaware that the decision was made internally and that it may have been to CPS or the police, passed to CPS or the police. What do you make of that?
I mean, if that's Alan's recollection, it's his recollection. But
did you discuss the prosecutions with Mr. Cook?
No.
The Royal Mail Group was involved with other types of prosecutions other than sub-postmasters for theft, fraud and false accounting. Is that right?
Yes.
That included things like mail theft?
Yes.
To what extent did you consider that it was unusual at the time that Royal Mail Group companies were the alleged victims of crimes, that they investigated those suspected crimes themselves, and then decided whether to prosecute them?
Well, I sort of didn't see it as odd because it had always been the case. You know, as far as I could see from the history of it's been there for it's always been like that for a long time.
With hindsight, do you think there are any difficulties with that?
With hindsight, obviously, from what I know now, yes. But actually, if you step back and you say, should that have allowed to happen what happened? No.
Sorry, can I just clarify what you mean? Is what you mean that a company should be able to be in a position as alleged victim, investigator and prosecutor, and there still not be a miscarriage of justice?
Sorry, I didn't...
That's a bad question.
Yeah.
Is it your view that a company who is an alleged victim of crime investigates the alleged crime and then goes on to prosecute that crime, that in itself shouldn't cause the...
That's my point.
Yes, that's what...
It isn't to do, once again, it isn't to do with the structure. That isn't the issue. Because obviously that happened for a long period of time before. That should, where there is a miscarriage of justice or where there is data that's not been provided, which should have been provided, that's what's unacceptable, not the process.
Do you not think the position, it's been described as judge, jury and executioner, as you'll have heard before. The fact there's no independence or third-party involvement, do you accept that the lack of third-party involvement causes inherent risks in how the prosecutions are run?
It does. It does. So today, I don't think that should happen. Today, I don't believe the way that it was operated should happen. And the reason I don't believe it should happen is because it obviously had flaws in it.
Sorry, could you repeat?
It obviously had flaws in the process. But if you go back 20 years, and you say, actually, the way that it was done in the Royal Mail, which had done it like that for hundreds of years, should that have been a reason for the tragedy that's happened? No, it shouldn't be. So I don't think people can hide behind, it's because of that this happened. It's not, it's because of people that this happened.
Do you think proper structures and processes could have mitigated the chances of the scandal happening?
It's always in the process.
So you were aware of the prosecutions. Were you aware that the prosecutions of sub-postmasters relied on data generated by the Horizon IT system?
I'm not acutely aware of it, but it would be obvious that it would be, because obviously that was the EPOS system of the branches.
On an operational level, who or which team did you think was responsible for investigating suspected theft, fraud or false accounting on the part of sub-postmasters? Again,
I can't recall exactly, but I would say it was in that sort of security legal area of the business.
So we have the security team. Where did you think the security team sat in the reporting line within the group?
Again, I don't exact because I haven't seen the organograms, but I think my recollection is that they were all worked into the legal teams, and that they all worked into the company secretary.
So the legal team, where did the legal team sit?
I think, again, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it reported into the company secretary.
And the company secretary of which company?
Of Royal Mail Group.
And so legal was a group function?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Did you work with or know Tony Marsh?
No.
Do you have any knowledge of non-formal reporting lines between the security team and Post Office Limited?
Non-formal?
As in, let me rephrase that. As a matter of practice, are you aware of the extent to which the security team, which you've described, worked with people within Post Office Limited?
Only from the documentation that I've seen.
Again, at the operational level, who did you think was responsible for the decision as to whether or not to prosecute a sub-postmaster?
I would have, again, I would just say in the legal team.
So within group, in legal?
Yeah.
And who did you think was responsible for the conduct of those prosecutions? Would that be legal again?
Yes, I think so.
Were these matters actively on your mind at the time when you were running the company?
Not at all.
Why not?
Because obviously there were many other things that were being addressed both in all of the businesses, but actually more so if when you've got all the structures and processes in place that you think are there and there's nothing coming back that's indicating in any way, shape or form that there's some sort of systemic issue that is then resulting in these prosecutions, then nothing was ever raised of that nature the whole time I was there.
You said when you've got all the structures and processes in place and then nothing comes back, how did you satisfy yourself that the structures and processes were in place in relation to prosecutions? Because
you've put the team in place to do that.
And which team is that?
It's the legal team and it's the security team, and it cuts across into the operational teams. And there's a number of facets, as there is in every organisation, that are working together on these issues. But the critical thing from a non-exec perspective, again, is the way you have to think about it is do you have the structures and processes in place that should enable, if there is an issue, that issue is flagged up. And as I say, you go from board, poll board, Royal Mail board, audit and risk committee. Each management team in each one of those divisions has its own management board, which meets every month formally, every week off the back of it. Each of those executives underneath that will have their own board in terms of where that mix is. You've got internal audit into the process as well, and to another degree, when we put in have you say, you get that's a facility to get feedback from the thing. So there are lots of checks and balances here that give people the opportunity to be able to flag something up. The issue was things were not flagged up.
I want to start looking at some of the oversight, and I'm going to start at the group level. Can we look at RMG 706, please?
I've got it. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
I've heard before it wasn't possible to do that, so very glad to see that it was rotated. Thank you. So we have the Audit and Risk Committee of Royal Mail Holdings, and this is minutes of a meeting on the 11th of November 2003. You're there in attendance as, well, you're chairman of the company, but not chairing the committee.
Yeah, I didn't normally sit on the Audit and Risk Committee. Let the chair of that committee chair that, but I would go from time to time when there were specific issues.
Looking down the attendance list, we have Jonathan Evans, Company Secretary. I think you said in your evidence earlier, your understanding is that's where group legal would have reported.
I think so. So I'm not 100% sure, but I take a guess. Yeah.
We've then got Derek Foster, Internal Audit and Risk Management Director. Do you recall working with him?
No, not really at all, no. But it would be typical and that the internal audit and risk attended the audit and risk committee.
And looking at the attendance list there, who, if anyone, has legal experience or legal qualifications?
Well, I wouldn't know. I would imagine Jonathan Evans did.
Could we turn to page 5, please? And if we can go down to the bottom of the page, please. Thank you. We have there, it says a security report. Can I start by asking what the security report was?
Again, I can't 100% recall, but it looks as if it's a report on, I'll just put this on crime across the Royal Mail Group.
In your statement, it's page 25, paragraph 47, you refer to this document and you say, I assume these figures, so the figures in paragraph A, I think, and onwards, I assume these figures relate to the Royal Mail side of the business as opposed to the post office, because it refers to Royal Mail personnel, that's in this document, and you refer to a different document there. Looking back, do you think here that the Audit and Risk Committee were looking solely at Royal Mail, or was it looking at Post Office as well?
Well, again, it's a long time ago, so I can't recall, but it seems to me, I mean, it says Royal Mail personnel related crime costs of business. The level of prosecutions, I mean, I don't know 100%, but when I look at this looks to me as if it's a Royal Mail. It's about the Royal Mail.
I mean, in paragraph 44 of your witness statement, you say that you don't recall any discussion during board meetings of the prosecutions that Post Office Limited was pursuing against sub-postmasters. When you say that, does that include subcommittees of the board as well?
If I was involved in those subcommittees, that would involve that. But at no stage did we have any real discussion about the level of prosecutions in Pol. And I've studied all the documents. There's nothing in here really.
So just with that in mind, if you have no recollection of discussing the prosecution of sub-postmasters, we have this minute where prosecutions are discussed.
Sorry, which one?
Sorry, so we have the minute here.
This one?
At A, yes. Do you take it then that this is purely to do with Royal Mail?
I can't say 100%, but I would. It pretty much looks like that.
Do you recall whether the committee at a meeting like this would have tested whether the security department was acting in compliance with its legal obligations arising from bringing prosecutions?
I mean, again, I couldn't recall that.
Is that you can't recall, or?
No, I can't recall.
Please, could we bring up RMG 708, please? It's another Audit and Risk Committee meeting of Royal Mail Holdings. And we can see at the top there you're in attendance.
Yeah.
Could we turn, please, to page 6? And down to protecting Royal Mail assets. Thank you. It's Andrew Wilson, Director of Security, attended for this item. Do you remember Andrew Wilson?
Not clearly.
The committee noted that Royal Mail was inherently vulnerable as a business to attacks on its assets, whether through fraud or other events. This is due to the scale of the business nature and the core handling processes and liquidity of assets. The key activity of the business in protecting Royal Mail's assets and pipeline, including increased focus on fraud investigations, protection of information, and the level of prosecutions. Do you have any recollection of what was discussed at this meeting?
No, I think it's 20 odd years ago. When I read it, this, I think, may be in response to the dispatches programme that there'd just been, which it refers to in A.
Yes. So what was the dispatches programme?
There was a dispatch programme, I can't remember 100% which, where I think undercover reporters had gone into a mail centre or a delivery office and had shown, bad activity, and I think including the mail theft. So when I read this, again, I can't recall it, it's like 20 years ago, but it does mention the dispatches programme, and I would hazard a guess that this was reported off the back of that.
So, again, to the best of your recollection, this is talking about Royal Mail rather than Post Office?
Yeah. I can't be 100%, but when I read it, it looks like that.
Mr. Leighton, if that's right, and I'm not trying to dispute that with you for the moment, would you have expected that there would be similar security reports dealing exclusively with Post Office Limited to the Post Office Board?
I think the answer is, our screen went off. I'm not sure, sir. And the reason I say that is that most of this audit work and reports came up to the Royal Mail Group Board. What I would have expected, if there was a concern in any way, shape or form, that would have come to the Royal Mail Group Board and to the Post Office Board.
Well, I follow what you say, but my thought process was a bit more straightforward. If it was thought appropriate to report to Royal Mail that there had been 399 prosecutions in a particular year, that's the correct figure, wouldn't it have been equally appropriate to report to the Post Office that Post Office had prosecuted 100 people or whatever it was?
When you put it like that, yes.
Right. It's just that I've not seen it yet. I may be shown it, but minutes of the Post Office Board which provide that sort of information.
And I agree with you. I mean, that because I think if that information would have been available, then I think that would have helped. And I think I reflect that in my written statement at the end of the conversation. We may talk about that later.
Yeah, yes, we will come on to that. So, sorry, do you have any further questions before I...
I'm sorry to have interrupted, but the thought popped into my head, so to speak, as you were questioning Mr. Leighton about this, so I thought I'd clarify it while I could.
Of course, thank you, sir. Mr. Leighton, is it fair to say that the audit committee here is exercising oversight of the investigation and prosecution of crime affecting Royal Mail?
Well, that's what it looks like.
Do you think at any point it exercised oversight or control over the investigation and prosecution of crime affecting Post Office Limited?
That I don't know either.
In your mind at the time, if you can, where did you think responsibility for the oversight of the investigation and prosecution of crime affecting Post Office Limited fell?
It fell into legal and security, and therefore that reported into the company secretary.
So, for that reason, can you explain why we haven't seen minutes of the audit committee of Royal Mail, the Royal Mail Holdings? Sorry, I'll start again. The company secretary attended the audit and risk committee of the Royal Mail Holdings board. Yeah. Why was the Royal Mail, the audit and risk committee of the Royal Mail Holdings board not exercising oversight of the investigation and prosecution of crimes that affected Post Office Limited, if that was reporting through the company secretary?
Sorry, I don't.
let's take it in stages. You say that the Jonathan Evans, the company secretary, that's the line of report for legal.
That's what I think. I'm not 100%, as I said to you.
I think earlier you said that you thought the decision to prosecute and the investigation of offences, responsibility for that lay with legal.
Yes.
At group level.
Yes.
And we see that the Audit and Risk Committee of the Royal Mail Holdings Group are exercising oversight of the prosecution of offences affecting Royal Mail. Yes?
Yeah, but their oversight is on the Royal Mail and Poll and Parcels. The Royal Mail Audit Committee's oversight is across all of the elements of the business.
Yes, and so that's my question. Why, in those circumstances, was the Audit and Risk Committee not exercising the same type of oversight we see here in respect of prosecution of crime that was affecting Post Office Limited?
That I don't know.
Is that a failure in the process?
Is it a failure in the process? I mean, when I look at all of the papers, actually the reporting, I mean, we've got almost 8 years worth of data. If you look over that 8 years worth of data, the reporting on prosecutions across the whole of the group, I think there are 2 or 3 papers, 2 or 3 in the whole of that period of time. So what it says to me, when I step back and look at it, is if this is the landscape of 7 or 8 years, and in this landscape there are a couple of audit committees where they're talking about losses and prosecutions, then it seems to me that in the organisation these 2 things were not seen as significant. That's what this says to me.
Can I ask, why was there not a general counsel role on the group board?
I mean, I looked at this, if in my experience, and obviously I chair some large companies, the general counsel tends not to sit on the board. You know, certainly in the organisations I've chaired, the council, general counsel, legal counsel are not board members. So that's the first thing. So it's, for me, would not be unusual that there's a general counsel or legal does not sit on the board of the organisation. It's not always the case, and certainly in my experience, it's the opposite.
And is that the same in respect of attendance at Audit and Risk Committee? Would you expect a General Counsel to attend the Audit and Risk Committee?
It all depends on what. What's confusing in this is, I think Jonathan Evans obviously sits at every single one of these meetings all of the time. It appears that everything reports into him. So provided there is somebody from legal at those meetings, I think that's fine. What I can't see is further down the organisation where the legal counsel fitted into some of the other set-piece plays, for want of a better description.
So it is a touch early, but I am confident the next line of questioning will take longer than 20 minutes. So I propose this as a time to bring today's proceedings to a close, if you're content with that. I think you're on mute, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Leighton, that this means that you have to return, but I'm grateful for your indulgence. Normally, if a witness doesn't complete their evidence on a given day, they're asked not to discuss that evidence with others until it is completed. But I think in your case, that's unrealistic, particularly if you want to, that is, particularly since we don't actually know when you're going to return. So there is no embargo upon you discussing the evidence you've given, but I would encourage you not to. Can I put it in that way?
You can, sir.
Right. I think we're starting at 9:45 tomorrow. Is that right, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, that's correct, sir. We're hearing from Roderick Williams.
Fine. So 9:45 tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.